doing, Sprocket? Oh, hello, Internet. My name is Quinn, and this is the second annual anniversary video and frequently asked questions. For this year's anniversary, I'm once again answering questions from patrons, and I'm also going to mix in a little restoration project that I think you might like. Okay, let's go. What I have here is a mechanical acre meter from an International Harvester seed drill. The International Harvester Company was formed in 1902 as the merger of the McCormick Harvesting Machine Company and the Deering Harvester Company. So you'll also hear it referred to as McCormick Deering sometimes, but the proper name for it these days is International Harvester. And they made mechanical acre meters like this for seed drills from probably somewhere around 1920 to as late as 1950, they would have used this style. I salvaged it from a McCormick seed drill that was found in a field on a very good friend of mine's property, and she said I could take it and see what I could do with it, and I was immediately drawn to it. I love mechanical farm implements of all sorts. You can take the girl off the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the girl, so as soon as I saw this, I knew I had to have it. If you're not familiar with seed drills, they are a relatively modern agricultural invention, and on the scale of agriculture, modern is 100 years or so, but what they are is a machine that cuts a trough in the dirt and it pours seed into that trough, and then it has a packing wheel that comes in behind it and packs the dirt back on top of it. So it's a mechanical way to plant seed very efficiently. Now, a very important element of that is your seed drill has to be calibrated for the crop that you're planting and the type of soil and where you're located in the world and so on. So for a given crop, you might want to say put down 50 pounds an acre of seed. And so you need to figure out, well, are you actually doing that or not? And that's where the acre meter comes in. As you pull your seed drill around in the field, it tells you how many acres you've covered. The drivetrain of the machine is geared to this, and there's what basically amounts to a worm gear here, a very, very slow worm, and that turns this sprocket here, and then this is a ratchet mechanism here that's seized, but you can see there's a spring there. So it amounts to a very large gear reduction. It's basically a very slow moving gear train. And like a lot of farm implements, the seed drill is passively driven, so as you're pulling it with a tractor or even a horse team, there's a wheel on the ground that's rolling, and that wheel is driving the machinery on the seed drill. So it doesn't have any sort of power of its own. It's just taking power from the ground as you pull it and running the mechanism that drops the seed, and in this case also turns the acre meter. Getting this working is obviously going to be a little bit of a challenge. Currently it's a solid block of rust. It's completely seized. This has been sitting outdoors for probably 30 years, something like that. I think the first thing I'm going to do is give it a very long hot bath in evaporust. The year 2 of the Blondihacks channel was just phenomenal. I'm shocked by how people have responded to it. We hit 18,000 subscribers after year 1, and here we are in year 2, and we're just about to hit 54,000, I believe. So that's much more growth than I expected, honestly, and I really never intended to build that kind of audience. I just wanted to share my little shop projects that I like to do and my learning that I'm trying to do with all of my friends, and that's all of you. So that's all I ever wanted out of this channel, and I wanted to show people that anyone can do this stuff, and it doesn't have to be a dark art. So if you're interested in metalworking, maybe you can watch my channel, get inspired, and feel like you can do this stuff too. Because you can. There's some questions I'm not going to answer because I answered them in last year's video, which I'll put a card here for that, and also because I've answered them 1,000 times in comments and I'm just not going to do it anymore. Those questions are: what brand are your machine tools? Where did you get this apron? And how did you get into machining? So go ahead and watch last year's anniversary video for those questions and more. Patron Pile of Stuff asks, I see a good old Weller soldering station and a classic Radio Shack Micronta multimeter and a spiffy Rigol oscilloscope in your intro, but I'm not seeing those types of projects on your channel. Am I missing some top secret playlist or something? That is an excellent question, and it's one of the things I really should probably explain a lot more often. When I started this channel, I did in fact fully intend for it to include all manner of projects, electronics, restorations, machining, metalworking, fabrication, all kinds of stuff. Because that's what I used to do on my blog. You know, Blondihacks, which also has a strange name for a machining channel. People ask me about that a lot too. Blondihacks started as a blog back in 2009, and it was much more electronics focused. And I got into machining, and I got sucked into it and found that blogging was just really not a good medium for machining projects. So I made that intro when I started the channel, and you know, I like it. I've kept it because it's snappy, and you know, it definitely reflects my personality and all the things that I'm interested in. But if you want to see the electronic stuff, head on over to blondihacks.com for my blog. Patron Nicholas asks, would you ever consider moving to give yourself more shop space? If so, do you have your next mill or lathe picked out? I do hope to move to a larger shop space someday. That is in my long-term plan. It'll be a little while before I can achieve that, and COVID has certainly set all of that back quite a bit as well. But yeah, someday I'd like to have you know, a Bridgeport and a Monarch lathe or something cool like those, like the cool kids on Machinist YouTube have. That's the dream. But right now my shop is a 30-inch wide strip on the side of a 2-car garage that has to have 2 cars in it. So space is very, very tight. Hashtag not sponsored, but I have to say that Evapo-Rust is frankly amazing stuff, and maybe it's no better than other rust converters, I don't know, but when I was growing up, rust was this like unsolvable problem. Once you had it, it was just, you were done. And now we have these chemicals that take care of it like magic, and well, it's a great time to be alive. So the mechanism is all freed up now. The Evapo-Rust did its job there, so let's see about getting it disassembled. I've got some Croyle here, and I'm going to try to loosen up that nut on the bottom, and got this little wrench here from Eric at Hand Tool Rescue. Seems appropriate for restoring an old farm implement. And I thought I had it loose, but yeah, the actual bolt itself is turning, so that might be trouble. Patron Brett asks, what project have you completed that gave you the most satisfaction, and why? The most satisfaction I think I ever got was replacing the battery in an electric toothbrush. And it's the very, very first project on my blog. If you go on to blondihacks.com and you scroll all the way to the beginning, the very first project I ever posted was replacing the internal battery in a non-serviceable electric toothbrush. And I didn't figure out how to do that. I found a blog post from somebody else who had the same model of toothbrush and had replaced the battery in it. And there was 2 big takeaways for me that really sunk in. One was that anything that is assembled can be disassembled. You know, modern consumer products have gotten so good at looking monolithic and flawless. There's no screws visible, there's no seams visible often, there's no apparent way to take them apart. But they all come apart, everything comes apart. And that's what that toothbrush taught me. It turns out all you have to do is peel a little rubber thing off, and you twist a little thing here, and you slide a little thing over there. It's like a Japanese puzzle box. But the thing comes apart, and inside is a battery, and it's soldered in, but you can go down to Batteries Plus and buy that battery and just solder in a new one, and it doubled the life of that electric toothbrush. I think it was such an empowering experience to replace that battery, and it just got me excited to do more of that kind of thing, and it started the blog, and then 10 years later started the YouTube channel. Patron Paul asks, you don't have a surface grinder, so do you have any tips on finishing pieces so they look professional and nice? First and foremost is, you know, getting better surface finishes right off the machine tool is the easiest way to do it. As you get better, your surface finishes will improve, especially if you're using quality cutters on the mill. I've talked a lot about how you get what you pay for with milling cutters. So spend real money on milling cutters, and that will make your projects look a lot better right off the bat. And then on the lathe, I'll refer you to my surface finishes video, which is still, you know, the limit of my knowledge on the subject. But the better your surface finish is right off the machine, the easier it is to improve it from there. And then the next thing is just the same as woodworking, frankly, and that's sanding. You know, you can do a lot with emery paper, a piece of glass on your bench, and patience. It really does boil down to that. I think people may not always appreciate, if you've learned skills like this from watching 20-minute videos, you don't always appreciate how long things actually take. And sanding and finishing is one of those things. You know, I might show you 3 seconds of me rubbing a part on the emery paper, but I probably spent 45 minutes doing that. And then there's a few trick tools. Recently I showed the Scotchbrite wheel on my bench grinder, those ES2 fine Scotchbrite wheels. It's a Scotchbrite material with like a rubber impregnated in it, and I think there's some kind of polishing compound in there. So it's kind of like a buffing wheel and a deburring wheel and a polishing wheel, kind of all in one. And it's really quite remarkable. It does an amazing job. It'll take out shallow tool marks. It makes surfaces shiny and smooth and nice. Patron Dan asks, do you have any plans to convert your mill or lathe to CNC? I've definitely left that door open. One of the reasons I like the Precision Matthews PM25 mill is that it's known for having a lot of space under where the lead screws are. And so there's plenty of room in there for a ball screw conversion, which is step one in a CNC conversion. And so it's definitely something that I'm keeping the door open to, but it's not super high on my list. For me, though, the problem with CNC is that it makes everything into a software problem, right? Because now when you're building something, instead of being in the shop making something with your hands, you're sitting at the computer and you're doing your CAD and then you're doing your CAM and then you're simulating your tool paths and all that. And you're watching the machine and hope the cutter doesn't break. But it's not the experience that I came into this looking for. I like manual machining because your hands are on the hand wheels. You can feel what the cutter is doing and you're really, you're making something with your hands. And, my day job is sitting in front of a computer for 12 hours a day, and I really don't want to then also do that in my free time. I want to get away from the computer, and that's really what manual machining does for me. But something I could definitely see myself doing someday when I have a bigger shop and I can get a nice big mill is converting my little PM25 to CNC for, making small repetitive parts, and, it would be a fun project to do that conversion then. Patron John asks, what's the Sprocket story? She found you, you found her, she came with the shop, what happened there? So I adopted her from a local shelter a couple of years ago, and I think it's safe to say she chose me. I went into the little room where they have the cats, and I looked at them all, and she looked at me so sad. She was sleeping in her litter box, and she just looked like someone really, really needed to take her home. She's very, very chatty, as you may know from watching my videos. She's a Lynx Point Siamese. It's unusual to find a fancy pure breed in a shelter like that, but there she was. And I didn't know that's what she was when I adopted her. I just thought she was pretty. But Lynx Point Siamese, and Siameses in general, are known for being very, very chatty. Every portion of their brain is connected directly to their mouth. So she always has lots to say, and so that's why I gave up long ago trying to edit her out of my voiceovers. She is always sitting in the room talking to me while I'm recording, and it's better just to lean into that. So thanks for that, John, and she says meow. Over to the other side now. Let's see about getting these needles off. There's a cotter pin there, and I'll see if I can tap that out. And nope, the head of the cotter pin completely disintegrated. It's just a ball of rust. So I just scored it with the cutoff wheel on the Dremel and then broke the end off with the pliers and then tapped out the remains there with a punch, and that worked very well. And off comes that little needle. And now this main gear comes out. That's looking good. And the other cotter pin slid out on its own, and that looks fine. That'll buff out. We'll put that back in. And then take the other needle off. There's a couple of old colors of paint on there. Looks like it was originally McCormick Deering yellow and then later International Harvester red. Now for something slightly ill-advised, I'm holding the threads with pliers there, and luckily the nut was actually very loose. It really didn't need much, so I didn't damage the threads by doing that. So that nut comes off of there now, and off comes that gear. It's keyed square to the shaft there, since it's the drive gear. Makes sense. And now out comes this really interesting bolt. Now that broke loose, but look at why. It's actually round and has no screwdriver slot or anything in it. And it just sits in that transverse kind of worm gear there. So I don't know exactly how that's intended to work. And to further clean up the needles, I hit them with a wire wheel on the Dremel. These little wire wheels for Dremels are great. I'll put a link to these down below, but oh boy, eye protection, not negotiable with those. Those little wires fly off of there and they are nasty. Patron Dan asks, what do you prefer, American Smarties or Canadian Smarties? Well, Canadian, of course. Canadian candy and chips are a whole different world. Canada culturally exists exactly halfway between the United States and the United Kingdom. So we have half of the junk food from both countries and also a little mix of our own weird stuff. Canada is famous for weird potato chip flavors. So we have ketchup and dill pickle and all dressed, which are all great, by the way. There's no substitute for Canadian chip flavors. And if you've had, like, say, dill pickle in the US, it's not the same. They dial it way down because they're afraid Americans aren't going to like it, and it's terrible. Patron John asks, what would be the 3 most critical skills that you would say a kid needs to learn to become a machinist? That's a great question. I think the first one is math. There is a lot of math in machining, and it's not necessarily sophisticated math. We're not talking calculus here, but there is a lot of math, and I think the better grasp you have of geometry and how things relate to each other, the better. The second one is patience. If you've learned machining from watching YouTube, you get a very distorted perspective on how long things take. YouTube machining content is all either sped up or heavily edited down because it has to be entertaining. And so you may not appreciate that, a large roughing pass, might take a couple of minutes. And so you spend a lot of time, frankly, standing there staring at the machine. And so it's important to understand that that's normal and that things can take a while. And you spend a lot of time doing setups, getting things indicated in and making sure the vise is tight and seating parts properly, and there's so much of that. For the amount of time you spend cutting, you often spend more time doing setup work. And the third one I would say is meticulousness and planning. I don't know if that's a skill exactly or just a personality trait, but machine shop work, far more than other types of making craft type things that you can do, really responds well to planning ahead and being meticulous. The devil is so in the details. With woodworking, you can get away with a lot more improvisation as you go through a project. With machining, you really can't. You really have to, sit down with the drawings of the parts that you're going to make and really think through the order of operations. Because if you don't do it right, you can paint yourself into a corner or force yourself to try to correct mistakes that you made. You see a lot of that in my videos on my steam engine project where I have not spent enough time planning out a part. Patron Doric asks, what's the origin of the phrase, cleanliness is next to Renzettiness? I don't know, it just came out of my mouth and I said it a couple times because I thought it was funny. I don't script these videos, I just talk and whatever comes out of my mouth hopefully is funny, and that's it. So I don't have a better answer for that. Patron Thomas asks, what's your favorite kind of donut? Crawlers. And has the cat feeder lasted under the onslaught since your last web update? It has, in fact. For those of you who only know the YouTube channel, I, as I said, have a blog, and probably the most successful or popular blog post I ever had was on armoring Sprocket's automatic cat feeder. And she was so good at defeating its mechanisms and getting into it. She's weirdly smart, that cat, and I had to keep escalating and escalating and escalating until finally I just wrapped the entire thing in steel plate and welded it into a box. And since doing that, she hasn't honestly even tried anymore. And what I learned from that experience was that there are very few problems that can't be solved with a lot of steel plate. I've got some general questions here that a lot of people ask in comments or in emails and various other things. So I'll answer those here. First one is, can you make X for me? If you do need something made, I really do encourage you to check out your local machine shops. Every area will have a job shop and they will be able to make anything you want. Be prepared for it to cost real money. I think a lot of people don't appreciate how valuable machinist time is and what the overhead of a machine shop is. Don't go into it expecting to have your special custom part made for 20 bucks, right? Which I think we've all been trained by products on Amazon that everything costs $20. A good machinist is worth every penny. Once everything was disassembled, I put it back in the evaporust for 20 minutes and it came out all looking very, very nice indeed. I'm just going to oil everything up to keep it from re-rusting. Here's that very strange plain-headed bolt. I have no idea how that's supposed to not spin in there, but here's the pawl that drives the main gear there. So you can see how that spins around and rotates the main gear once per full revolution. It's a pretty cool little mechanism, very simple, very effective. So I can put all of these guys back together, looking good. I wonder if that stud on the bottom is supposed to be double nutted and it's just supposed to act as a free spinning axle for that worm gear maybe, but I really don't know. I didn't have cotter pins the right size, so I just used some roll pins in there instead. That'll be fine for now. Imperial versus metric. Yeah, I get this one a lot, mostly angry metric people, angry that I'm not using metric. Being Canadian, we grow up with both systems. We're taught metric exclusively in school, and everything government and official is all metric. Everything scientific, of course, is all metric. But in daily life, we see a lot of both. Street signs are all in kilometers, but we often talk in miles with each other. But I've shown metric projects on my channel, and I am slowly accumulating more and more metric tooling, so I never say never. Who knows? Maybe my next tools will be metric, or maybe not. Because if I get a bigger shop, like I said, I hope to do, if I buy a big Bridgeport, the only way to do that affordably is to buy a 50-year-old one from an old school or factory or something, and it's going to be imperial because it's in North America and it's 50 years old. So I love metric. Yay science, but living where I do, it's kind of an uphill battle. So sorry, metric folks. I am going to keep showing all of my dimensions in metric so that you can hopefully get the feel of what I'm doing and how big things are, get a sense of how big things are, but bear with me on that stuff. And more I get asked, have you seen Clow42's electric lead screw project, and why haven't you put it on your lathe yet? Yes, I am familiar with James's project. It's awesome. James and I are acquainted. He's a great guy. I have his control board, and I do fully intend to do a project implementing it on my lathe. I love the idea of an electronic lead screw. It's just on the project pile, and unfortunately my project pile is very, very big. So it'll be a while before I get to it, but it is on the list, so stay tuned for that. All right, let's give our little acre meter a test drive. You can see how the smaller needle there is kind of like your quarter acre measure, and just so you know that it's working, I guess, sort of a continuous reading there. And then when it does a full lap, there goes the big needle over to acre number 2. And then one more lap around on the little meter. I'm just driving it with a rubber band on the drill there. And there goes acre number 3. This is actually pretty cool. It's a very simple little mechanism. From the back, unfortunately, I had a lot more trouble driving it. It won't run face down, interestingly. The tolerances are such that everything kind of slumps forward and binds up. So this was the best I could do to show you it in action from the back. And you might think that, oh wow, those tolerances are all super sloppy and crappy, but that's intentional with something like this. Farm implement machinery has to run when it's caked solid with mud and the farmer has not lubricated anything in 10 years and it still has to work. So this is totally normal for this type of thing. And that wraps up year 2 of the Blondihacks YouTube channel. Thank you so much to all the fans who've been supportive of me. For every person who gives me a hard time for daring to be on the internet, there's another 50 of you who really love what I'm doing and let me know that you love what I'm doing. And that means the world to me. It really does. So thank you again for all the patrons, and that growth there has been great. And all of you who are subscribing and liking and commenting and sharing with all of your friends. You've made this channel what it is, and here's hoping for a good year 3.